Well, this is Ed Stetzer Live, and this and every Saturday we have some great conversations, and really we try to keep them, I don't know how you put it, sort of like up to the moment, the issues of the day. And so we're kind of excited about that, and I'm going to be talking today about an issue that maybe you're thinking about. Maybe you're thinking about the next few days here in America. It is July 4th. It's actually July 4th around the world as well, but we just celebrate it a little bit differently. And we're coming up on a big celebration of our nation. This is also 250th anniversary, so lots going on to talk about as well. Now, of course, next Saturday this time will actually be July 4th itself. Yeah, I know a lot of you listen on on the podcast or whatever, but next Saturday will be July 4th as well. We actually have Carlos Campo talking about the Bible's place. He leads the Museum of the Bible, the Bible's place in American history. But leading up to that, we're having conversations with someone named Dan Darling. Now, I've been friends with Dan Darling for a long time. We go way back. And he's written a book. And for some of you, the title's going to sound strange because it's like the title of the book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism. And for some reason, it's going to be like, well, why do you got to defend that? Like, that's obvious. It's, we're for God, we're for our country, we love our country. For others of you, you're going to have been to, maybe you're thinking about coming up, this big patriotic service in your church. And some of you are going to love it. Some of you like, well, it's a little bit like, why are people singing God Bless America with the same enthusiasm they're singing You're a Good Father? It's like, where does that fit in there? How does it fit in worship service? How does it fit in our life? So, but the title tells you something. Dan writes a book called In Defense of Christian Patriotism, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But let me introduce him first, and I got to introduce me as well, since I haven't done that. But Dan Darling, he's an author, a pastor, and a thought leader. I love the phrase thought leader. He serves as director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement at Southwestern Seminary, assistant professor of faith and culture at the Texas Baptist College. He's served in a variety of senior leadership nonprofit positions. He's pastored in Illinois and Tennessee. He's a columnist for World, contributor to USA Today as well. And he's joining us from the campus of another seminary in Raleigh-Durham, Southeastern Seminary. Dan, welcome to Ed Stetzer Live.
Ed, it's great to be on the radio with you, and great to talk about patriotism and Christianity.
Good. You're kind of a friend of the show. We've had you before, and I guess I should introduce myself. So I'm Ed Stetzer, your radio host, but normally in my everyday life, I am the dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. Campus is now in Los Angeles, soon to be in Phoenix and around the world. So, I spend a lot of time here in America. Dan, I was actually a month in the UK. I've been all over the UK. And it's interesting because it's been kind of fun to watch these European and other people coming from around the world to the World Cup. And man, some of them are just loving America and, really seeing just how awesome. I mean, we do live in a great country. And not just because when I came back from the UK, I got to have, unlimited refills at a restaurant, or not the fact that air conditioning was normal. I mean, those are, or, they got the bottles now in the UK, the tops stay attached to them. So you got this, I'm so excited not to have a bottle cap attached to the top of my drink while I drink it. So, there's little things, but, we have a lot to be proud of as a nation. I think we're, 250 years. I mean, again, the U.S. Constitution kind of reshaped the way the world thought about government. So much to talk about as well. But let's just start by talking about the fact that you started your book is titled. Now, your publisher, publishers pick titles, I know, but you probably had a voice into it. It is In Defense of Christian Patriotism. It's not like, about Christian patriotism. It's not like why Christian patriotism. It's in defense of it. So why was it necessary, or is it necessary, to defend Christian patriotism in our day and age?
It's a great question. And one of the things that motivated me to write the book was the fact that I think Christians in the last couple of decades have been defensive about patriotism, or a little nervous. Is it okay that I love my country? I think there's a sort of false binary among many Christians that, if I love God, I can't also love my country. And I think there's even been some pressure from, the secular world to say you have to choose between one or the other. And I'm here to think it's always a binary choice, that it's about ordering our loves. I borrowed this from C.S. Lewis and Augustine, the idea that we obviously love God supremely, but if we have our love for God then every other relationship underneath it, every other commitment or allegiance follows underneath that. So one of the examples I use that is 23 years ago. 23 years ago, I stood at the altar and pledged allegiance to my wife. And the pastor didn't say, well, you know, Dan, you either have to choose love for God or love for Angela. He said, no, if your love for God is where it should be, then you will love Angela in the way that you should. And so I think it's a similar with our country. And it's okay, it's good and right, I think, to be patriotic.
Yeah. So, but let's start a little bit by talking about the ordering of loves, because that's a major theological
Hmm.
concept. Actually, it wasn't that long ago when the Vice President Vance,
Hmm.
and the Pope were sort of having a public argument about how we might order our loves. So this is not like a small theological concept. It's a major theological concept, but it's really essential in the ranking or the prioritization of our loves. You give the example of your marriage. So where does the nation fit into that? Because certainly we see in Jeremiah, pray for the city, work for its
Hmm.
good. But where does the nation state, which doesn't exist as a concept 2,000 years ago when the last of the books of the New Testament are written, when Jesus said "Go to all nations," he didn't mean countries, because there were no geopolitical
Hmm.
entities called countries, and there were kind of peoples and empires. So why, like, I mean, I want to love my family. That's obvious. Maybe I want to love my city, but why my nation?
Well, I think Christians we're citizens of the kingdom of heaven, as we know. We're also um, we also belong and are inhabit places. And I think of Acts, where Paul is on Mars Hill, Acts 17, and he's talking about how God sovereignly ordains people in their borders and their places. I don't think it's an accident that we've been born in America. We live here, and I do think you can reference that Jeremiah 29 passage where Jeremiah is speaking to the exiles in Babylon. And he's saying, I know this, you're in a strange place, strange country, but seek the welfare, the flourishing of the city where I have called you. First Peter and Hebrews says that New Testament Christians are also exiles. And so, yes, we were citizens of the kingdom of God, but while we're here and inhabiting this place, we should seek the flourishing of the places where we live. And Ed, I don't know how to seek the flourishing of a city that you despise or you loathe or even that you're apathetic about. So I actually think a kind of love for where God has put us is part of Christian discipleship. It's part of really being on mission where God has called us.
And so, one of the things that, I mean, let's talk about Christian nationalism, because I mean, I'm concerned about
Hmm.
Christian nationalism. I've written about Christian nationalism. I'm also
Hmm.
concerned that, like, sometimes people on the more secular left side of things make everything about Christian nationalism. It's like, no, I love God, and I love the Bible. And because of my views from God and the Bible, I do want to impact public policy. And oh, that's Christian nationalism. Well, I don't think that's Christian nationalism. So, so how do we, like, where does Christian nationalism fit into the Christian patriotism conversation? I know it's a big question, but we have an hour. So talk to me about it.
It's a great question, and I've talked about that a lot and asked about that. I think, as you said, it depends what you mean by Christian nationalism. That term has
Right.
been used in many ways as a pejorative against conservative Christians who love their country. Right? If you get a little teary eyed when Chris Stapleton sings a national anthem, suddenly you're a Christian nationalist or something. But there is a group of self-described. I think Protestants would call themselves Christian nationalists, and Catholics are Catholic integralists. It's a small group, but they're fairly loud, and they are pretty dissatisfied with the sort of constitutional order, uh, religious liberty, these kinds of things, and really advocate for a more robustly Christian state, almost like a state church. And this is something that the founders never really wanted. They looked through history and they saw every time the church and state were intertwined that way, it was bad for the church and for the state. And as a Baptist, as I am, Baptist agitated for this idea of religious freedom. That yes, there are Judeo-Christian influences on the ideas of human rights and on our country, but we don't want to give the government the power that doesn't belong to it to decide between right and wrong forms of worship. I'm a limited government guy, Ed, and I think the government can barely run a functioning post office or a DMV. I don't think they're equipped to be saying you're worshiping right, you're worshiping wrong, you shouldn't be gathering, you shouldn't be doing this. And so that's not the power of the state. That's only Christ separates the sheep from the goats. Christ is the mediator between God and man. And so we don't want a country, a state, a nation that says you must be Christian, you must go to church. We've seen throughout history that hasn't worked out well.
Okay, so let's then. Well, actually, I probably should like invite people. I know people are going to talk about this because I think it's a fascinating topic, and particularly I want to talk about patriotic worship services. And I'll probably share
Mhm.
my own kind of opinion on that in just a minute. But I think others will have questions or thoughts or opinions as well. Our phone number is 877-548-3675. We got for brilliant calls from brilliant callers. We got a few copies of the book to give away as well. Again, it's not, I'm caller number 7. I'd like a book, but it's give us some great comments or questions. And we're talking about Christian patriotism, its place. Obviously, we're doing this because we're up on July 4th. I imagine, Dan Darling, like your book, this book's it's not like just out, but I imagine it's kind of like I have a friend named Tim Larson who wrote a book on, oh no, Robert McKenzie,
Mm.
who wrote a book on Thanksgiving and, Christian faith. And so I like every Thanksgiving, people call him and they want to be on the radio. So I'm guessing you've got one of those things where people call you this week. So thank you for kind of taking the time to join us. But I'm guessing people got questions or comments. 877-548-3675. 877-548-3675. I've been, just honestly, Dan, I've been in worship services where I was uncomfortable
Mm.
with the level of focus on America. But I've also been in worship services where I was quite comfortable with where it kind of fit praying for the country. When in a worship service, people are singing with more enthusiasm. I'm proud to be an American, hands raised,
Mhm.
weeping. I think ultimately, I want to make sure that that person who's in our church visit from Brazil doesn't get confused that where my commitment to Jesus and my love for my nation. But I'm like super crazy patriotic. I don't do this anymore because my kids are out of the house. But we would actually sit down and read. I made them read. They rolled their eyes sometimes. The Declaration of Independence on July 4th,
Mm.
and because I want them to know that where this nation fits, et cetera, et cetera. But I like my Jesus and my
Mhm.
my patriotism sort of carefully, um, you know, maybe not mixing in ways that I think are inappropriate. So talk to us a little bit about that because you're in Texas, man. Like man, the God and country services are everywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting. And a lot of pastors are wrestling with this. I've talked to a number of them, and I think in every context, it's going to be a little bit different, right? I do think primarily when we gather on Sundays, we are there to worship Christ and exalt Him, and nothing we do should detract from that. I do think there's an appropriate way um, at big things like this, like a big anniversary, to acknowledge our gratitude for living in America, to maybe acknowledge the sacrifice of those who have gone before us. I think this fits in with Christianity in the sense that you're talking about gratitude. You're and you're talking about the sacrifice of those who've gone before you, and being given this good gift of America. There's a way to do that in a way that's respectful. I too have been in services where a Fourth of July service where they're talking more about Jefferson than Jesus, and I don't think we should do that. It could be, some churches are fitting it in a really appropriate way. Other churches are saying, we're going to leave Sunday morning for worship of Christ, but we're going to do a Sunday evening patriotic event, or we're going to do a Saturday thing or whatever. I think mainly that worship of Christ has to be preeminent, no matter how you do it. The opposite mistake, Ed, I think, is to maybe, and this is the case not just with the Fourth of July, but with other things in the culture, is for pastors to kind of pretend it's not happening because everyone's talking about it. So I think there should be some acknowledgement of it. God has put us here in this place. Let's be grateful. Let's pray for the country. Let's see it as our mission field. All those kinds of things.
Yeah, so 100%, 100%. And we'll talk more about that. We're going to take calls as well. We got some people lined up already. I knew people want to talk about this because it's a great topic. It's 877, there's our number, 877 548 3675. The book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism by my friend Dan Darling. 877. They tell me to say it slower, Dan. 877 548 3675. Ed Stetzer Live. We continue our conversation with Dan Darling and your calls in just a minute. All right, we're back. Merle's our engineer. Merle, we should be playing patriotic music in the break, so because that's kind of a thing. So, but we're back. Ed Stetzer live talking to Dan Darling. On the other hand, patriotic music. Maybe we should do that next week. I don't know, but it's kind of exciting. This actually, just so you know, it's 250th anniversary of America. It's actually come 100th anniversary of Moody. There's all kinds of fun things. And this summer is the 39th anniversary of my marriage. I just thought I'd throw that in there. I don't know why I threw that in there, because it's Saturday morning and I'm feeling excited. Anyway, our number talking about patriotism, Christian patriotism, the place of it. Again, Dan wrote a book called In Defense of Christian Patriotism. Dan Darling, our guest. Our number is 877-548-3675. All right. So, Dan, let's talk a little bit about how that sort of plays itself out. I'm kind of of the view that there's kind of a lazy patriotism, which is, basically,
Hmm.
I don't know, blurting sometimes that I love my country. But there's also what I'd like to see as a more robust patriotism, caring about its
Hmm.
values, caring about, justice and liberty for all, and all those
Hmm.
sorts of things. So when you wrote a book called In Defense of Christian Patriotism, you told us why you should have it. What would it look like to be a patriotic American?
Well, I think first of all, it's love for the country, the people, the ideals, the place, nurturing that love. I also think a good patriotism is sort of active in helping to shape the country. A lot of times, people mistake patriotism for just blind loyalty to a particular president or administration or set of policies. In fact, patriotism at times will have you opposing certain politicians or policies or ideas because you are calling your country to live up to her ideals. And I think a great example of that is some of our greatest social reformers had really loved the country, but called it to live up to her ideals. I think of Frederick Douglass, who wrote a great essay, "What to the Slave is the Fourth of July." He revered the founders. He said, the project that they had given us was really brilliant, but we're not living up to this. Martin Luther King did something similar. I think one of the things we do with our pro-life activism is we say, "Man, we love our country. We would like it to live up to its promise that all men are created equal, even unborn children." And so patriotism is not just sort of this blind loyalty to people and whatever. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt has a great quote where he said, "Sometimes patriotism means you oppose the president, means you oppose certain policies." And so that's what I think it is. It's also not naivete about our history, about the shameful parts of our history. Um, Telling our story in full means telling the good and the bad parts. I think we get this from Scripture. Scripture tells the story of Israel in the Old Testament, and it narrates both the good and the bad parts. I think this is all really what patriotism is.
Yeah, super. Okay, good. Let's take some calls. I think we could maybe have some good conversation here. Let me just remind people that our number is 877-548-3675. 877-548-3675. Let's go to Gary in Naperville. Gary, I used to live in Wheaton, not far from you, but Gary, you're live on the air. Jump right in.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, I appreciate what you're talking about today. And in fact, I'm familiar with Wheaton. Our college church has been my church.
All right, well, let's jump into your comment, though, Gary.
Okay, so what I've seen, I've been involved in politics. And when I was a young man, 50 years ago in politics, there were many Christians involved. And it kept the political decisions towards a Christian worldview. Then in the last, especially 40 years, all of a sudden there became this idea that Christians should be involved, and Christians not only didn't get involved openly in politics, a lot of them weren't even voting, and it's allowed society to move away from Christian principles. So that's where you get, the abortion, you get the crime, behaviors that treating people unfairly by their race or by their, different ways. So I think it's really important on what you're talking about that people get more involved, because you realize the old saying goes, if good people don't get involved in politics, such as Christians, you leave politics to the people that are not good.
100%, Gary. I love that comment, too. If you hold on to, we're going to give you a copy of In Defense of Christian Patriotism by Dan Darling. And here's a fun fact. I used to talk to Gary's pastor, Josh Moody's Gary's pastor's name. I think he's going to be on the program next couple of weeks. He's got a new book coming out. And we talked about navigating some of these, Christian patriotism sort of things at church. Well, he's British. And so he always used to say, this is easy for me because I'm not, I'm from another country as well. And a great church, Gary, you go to as well. But Dan, talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, one of the things that if people see, politics. He said it was about politics, and he's talking specifically about politics. But man, I think lazy patriotism is posting just on Facebook. But man, running for office, I love that. So how does that fit in? How does public engagement and involvement fit in from school boards to everything else?
Yeah, I think Gary's right. I think if we're to obey Jesus' command to love our neighbors ourselves, and we have an opportunity, really a rare stewardship in human history, where we have a voice and a vote, we can shape uh, these things. Then we can't say we fully love our neighbors if we don't use the opportunity to shape the policies that affect our neighbors' flourishing, and we're not seeking the flourishing of the city if we're not engaged. Now, what that engagement looks like is going to differ for different folks. People have different callings. Some should run, good Christians should run for office, school board or state rep, or maybe national offices. Others are going to do a more quiet thing in their community where they're maybe starting a nonprofit, or they're engaged in certain ways. I think all of us should be engaged at the very basic level of being informed citizens, and as Christians being engaged in our local churches, our church reaches the community. But like Gary said, there's really no um, I think withdrawing and not speaking to some of the issues and not being engaged really is not consistent with what Christ calls us to do. Again, different callings, different people have different, resources and opportunities to do this. So it's not going to look the same for everybody. And when I say engage, and I talk about this in the book, I don't mean everyone has to be mad on Facebook at the same time. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying, real substance and engagement that moves the needle and really makes positive change.
Yeah, no, I love that 100%. Let's take another call. Let's go to James in Ohio. James, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Hi. I'm an educator, and I've taught world and U.S. history for 16 years, and I've taught government for 8 years. And I believe it might be an ignorance of history why the church is going toward extreme nationalism. I think it's because they don't know our history in the 1920s and 30s and what that led to. It led to World War III. World War II, excuse me, World War I and World War II, but more World War II. I'm talking about in Italy and in Nazi Germany. I think
Sure.
I see us headed the wrong way, and I don't think the church is knowledgeable of its history. I think that we dropped the ball on history, and I think they would actually be able to see that it doesn't matter who's in charge. Once you allow nationalism, extreme nationalism, to take over, you're not going to have a democracy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think James, you pointed to World War II. And of course, Hitler, not just this, as you talked about, extreme nationalism, but also co-opted the church. So again, it sort of does tie into, Dan, some of what you're talking about is that in defense of Christian patriotism. But James is concerned, and I would just say, like, I'm concerned. Again, I have no unpublished thoughts. So I've written all these articles on these things. So if people just Google my name and Christian nationalism, they'll see articles I've written about this topic. So I'm concerned that politicians and government figures love to use faith and find ways to co-opt the church. We just know that. We just should expect that. And I think there's a little bit of naivete that sometimes Christians have. So how do we be the people who do care about Christian patriotism and love the way you described it? I'm with you on the way you described it. That's why I have you on the program. But we also know there's a whole ecosystem of politicians and government figures who want to co-opt that, and now there is a concern and a danger in and around Christian nationalism. Take a few minutes and unpack that for us. Well, let me make sure to on time. When I say take a few minutes, I got about a minute and a half left in this segment, so we might go over 2 segments with this. But tell us a little about your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the concern is really serious, and every generation has to renew their love of the American ideals and renew the country. And Ronald Reagan said, freedom is one generation away. And what we have, and we've been given, what we've inherited in this great country, we have a responsibility to steward for the next generation. And I think Christians do that wisely by applying truths of Scripture to public policy, by obviously putting Christ first. I think church-going Christians who have a right understanding of these things understand that there's limits to what we can do. I think some of these extremes, like Christian nationalism, come from a lack of realism that as much good as we can do and as good as this country is, it's not the kingdom of God. And I think that realism is actually important for politics so that you can go into it with realistic expectations. You understand you're not going to win every fight. You're going to lose some elections, lose some policy fights, but you can do some good. I think when we have these outsized expectations, when politics becomes the end goal, I think that's where we kind of lose sight of what's important.
Good. We'll continue our conversation with Dan Darling and your calls. We've got some good calls on the line already, but want to invite you to join us. 877-548-3675. Again, the book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism, leading up to our Independence Day next weekend. Good conversation to have. Our number one more time, 877-548-3675. All right, we're back. Dan Darling's our guest. In Defense of Christian Patriotism is our conversation. Dan, next week I will be up in the Bay Area, San Francisco. I'll be preaching at Resonate Church for, I think you probably know Ryan Kwan, one of our Talbot grads, and staying there for the weekend. You know, they're one of those churches that have like Thursday night service and Sunday services, like my church does. So get to stay at the weekend. So I'm going to be going out on one of those little cruise boats and watch the fireworks off the Golden Gate Bridge. And I think I'm going to break out in right on the San Francisco harbor and start singing, "I'm proud to be an American." So let's talk about that. Cause I know where you are, theologically, we're both conservative theologically. We're probably both be identified as conservative politically. Do people who have different views and values, can they love the country too? I mean, that's not Christian patriotism in all cases, but can they love the country too?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think, I'm politically conservative, theologically conservative. People know where I stand. They can read my stuff as they can read your things. But I have a lot of friends
we're both not subtle in our publishing, so we kind of we're out there.
Right.
So.
That's right. But we have friends. I have friends that disagree with me politically, but they deeply love their country. And what we're doing is we're both arguing what we feel is the best for the country, what lives up to her ideals. We may have a disagreement on what that policy looks like, and I don't think we should shy away from that. But yes, people who disagree with it. I have neighbors and friends who on the other side of the political aisle, but they have their American flag out. They love the country. So I don't think it. We should think that we're the only ones that really love the country, all that kind of stuff. I don't think that helps actually with civility and the sort of kind of culture we needed to sustain us for another 250 years.
Gosh, but I got to say, as someone who looks at our country and say, I want to say to them, your ideas are really bad for the health of the nation. I love, if you're interested in learning more, there's actually a document called For the Health of the Nation. And it's from the National Association of Evangelicals. And I like how they framed it around for the health of the nation. So we have Christian views that make it a better country for everyone, but it does require, dealing with opposing views. Matter of fact, that leads to one of our comments. Let's go to Beth in Illinois. Beth, you're live on the air. Jump right in.
Thank you so much, and happy Saturday to the both of you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I am a Christian first, and I'm a patriot second, and I've known the Lord since I was 16 years old, and I just basically wanted to make a comment to you that I live in the capital city, and of course, there's a lot of political things here, but I consider myself more as a Christian social activist, and I'm actually getting ready to go down to an event with some other friends for two reasons. Number one, to lift up the name of Jesus. We have a Jesus flag, and then also to have our 250th anniversary of independence flag that we'll have, and wearing the 250th anniversary buttons. And the reason why I do this is sometimes you go into a group of people that have an opposite worldview, and just to have one-on-one conversations with them.
Love this.
Sometimes that's the best thing, to lift up Jesus. I actually, at another event, I had met a girl who was a socialist, leftist communist. We had a talk in the lobby. 1 week later, we went to lunch together, and I shared my faith with her.
Love this.
So she wants to get together again sometime in the near future. So I'm asking for your prayers for her. And once again, we love Jesus first in our country, and I'm so thankful for this country, for the freedoms we've had. And, blessed is a nation whose God is the Lord, as Psalm says. So that's
Beth, I
where
love, Beth, that you're building bridges with people that you disagree. Thank you for your call, because I think, Dan, that's a marker of when America has been healthiest, and right now we're very polarized. I mean, Beth just says, I've got together with these people. She's socialist, Marxist, communist. So, and which, by the way, is interesting. It's also interesting to see that it appears like the most recent elections in the Northeast. It appears our country is becoming increasingly divided politically, but people like Beth are having lunch with people that disagree deeply about politics. That seems like a patriotic value. Unpack that and comment on Beth's comment. Oh, by the way, Beth, we're going to give you a copy of Dan's book, In Defense of Christian Patriotism. You hold on. Our producer will, after you hear Dan's response, our producer will give that to you. So, Dan, comment on that.
Yeah, I love her perspective and her spirit. And look, all these things can go together at the same time. Beth, like you and me, has very strong views about the country and what's good for the country, loves the country, but also is able to, I think, rightly zoom out and say, okay, I have strong views. I'm going to bring those to the public square. I'm not going to flinch from those, but I have to zoom out and say, I'm going to share the country with people who disagree with me. What does that look like? And we need to have conversations across the divide. I'm part of this organization, Angels. You may have heard of it. And one of the things they encourage folks to do is, hey, bring your views to the table. You don't stop being Republican or stop being conservative or liberal or Democrat, but come and talk to people who disagree with you. And what I find often, you might find this too, Ed, is that I don't know that I necessarily change my views when I talk to someone who disagrees, but I sharpen my own arguments. And then I see that other person in their full humanity. And what I love about her too is not only that, but having the evangelistic mindset of saying, my main goal is to reach people for Christ and to share the gospel. And if I'm going to do that, I have to have conversations. I have to have lunch with people, right? I mean, I have to know them. And what a great way of holding all those things together.
Yeah, and I love that you want Christians in the public square. There's a very famous book by Richard John Newhouse called The Naked Public Square, which sort of talks about this idea that, he was then a Lutheran, but kind of like how people are trying to strip religion out of the public square in the context of secularism. And I want us to be there. I don't want us to be there in ways that restrict the religious liberty of others, but I want us to be there advocating and speaking into the cultural moment. I think that's a good and appropriate thing. So Beth, super call as well. Let's go to Raj in Oklahoma. Raj, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Dr. Darling, quick question and comment. There was something that you had said that really resonated with me, and it was patriotism is about loving the place where God has planted you. And that sentence, I focused on the word place. Maybe God has placed me in a certain family of origin. Maybe he's placed me in a certain workplace. And I thought that really resonated with me. And my quick question is, do you think that we could use the word patriotism and loyalty in the same vein?
That's a good question, Raj. Hold on just a second. We're going to give you a copy of Dan's book, In Defense of Christian Patriotism. What do you think, Dan?
I really like your perspective there. I think it's acknowledging that God is sovereign and He's put us in these places for a purpose. God is not up in heaven, saying, "Man, I shouldn't have put Dan in America in 2026, or I shouldn't have put Ed in California in 2026." Not that California is not part of America, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes, sometimes it depends.
Right. But God has done this on purpose for us to live on mission. I think loyalty, to answer your question, is part of patriotism. Now, obviously, we go back to ordering our love. So our loyalties, that we have to have them in order, right? So our first loyalty is to God, and then obviously we go down these lesser allegiances. And when a lesser allegiance conflicts with our loyalty to God, then we have a conflict, right? So Peter says, "I'll obey God rather than man." He had to disobey the government because he had to obey God first. And so those things have to be in order, but we can have loyalty to lesser things. I've heard Christians say, I can't pledge allegiance to the United States because I only pledge allegiance to Christ. I say, well, no, you could pledge allegiance to lesser things. I pledged allegiance to my wife when I married her. Doesn't mean my allegiance to her supersedes my allegiance to Christ, but we have these sort of things in order, and I think we can do that well. And that means loyalty where we need to have loyalty, unless that loyalty conflicts with the higher loyalty.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that we're going to give Raj a copy of the book as well. So we'll our producer jump on and do that. We're going to continue our conversation with Dan Darling, and we have one more segment with your calls. Dan, when I come back, I'm going to ask you, should I have patriotism in California? I'm going to ask you, should people who live in China have patriotism for their nation? Is it just America? I'm going to ask them. We make some hard questions when we come back. 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. We're talking about Christian patriotism, in defense of Christian patriotism, by Dan Darling. All right, we're back. We kind of got one segment, and we got to be quick on some answers, kind of a lightning round. I told you right before the break, I want to ask, love my country. Should I love my state? And I live in a super liberal state. Should I be patriotic about California? What about people who live in a repressive nation like China? Should they have pride in their nation or patriotism? So talk to me about those things.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot. And I think we have to separate patriotism from, loving or approving maybe the existing government or those kinds of things. And so I think even someone in, say, China with less freedom is going to oppose and not like the sort of oppressive government and all these things. But there's still things about Chinese culture that are good and wholesome and that are worth loving. And you may actually oppose, the government because you're patriotic. You wish that the country God has put you in was better, was operating better. I think of someone like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? He went back to Germany because he felt Germany, the country that he loved, was going in a wrong direction, and actually opposed Hitler. He didn't hate Germany. He actually did it out of love for God, I think, but also love for that country. So I think there's a way to do it. It's obviously harder when you're in an oppressive environment, but there's still cultural goods that you can appreciate, even if the system and the culture and the sort of government is not, godly and is really oppressive.
All right, here we go. We're going to jump into lightning round, which means callers need you to jump right into your comment and or question. And then Dan, I know you teach classes, but we gotta shorten our comments. Here we go. Mary in South Florida, you're live on the air. Jump right in.
Do you think that churches should, as a rule, have a political ministry?
Should they discuss
from,
politics?
not at the pulpit, but
right.
But I used to be part of Faith Forum, which we would, discuss, issues that were coming up and legislation, and it was separate, and to help them see from a believer's worldview.
Well, let's get him to weigh in. Hold on. We're going to give you a copy of the book. But Dan, what do you think? I think it's a great question for Mary. What do you think?
It's a great question. I think we have to distinguish between the gathered church and the scattered church. I think the gathered church together, pastors should address core issues from the text that Scripture is very clear on, to empower their people to think well. I also think churches can equip people to then go out into the community and live out their specific callings, right? So I don't think on a Sunday morning you're going to have a pastor talking about economics per se, but there may be people within the church who are equipped with the biblical worldview who can then use their talent and skills and go to the marketplace and speak to those things. So yes, the church is an influence in that way, and the church should mobilize people to go to all parts of society and really live out the gospel that way.
I love that. I want people in churches to be informed. Mary Supercall, remember, hold on the line. We're going to give you a copy of In Defense of Christian Patriotism. Penny in Alabama, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Please comment on the importance of Christians voting.
Oh, let's go, Penny. All right, hold on the line, too. We're going to give you a copy of In Defense of Christian patriotism. Dan, voting, like that seems to me, if you're going to be patriotic, posting on July 4th, 250, anniversary meme is a lot less important than actually voting.
Yes, I think Christians should exercise the right to vote. Sometimes it's hard, and don't have great choices. But we have something that few people in human history have been given, few Christians in human history have given, the opportunity to have our voice heard when it comes to policy or politicians. We may wish we had more influence, or our guy won, or our policy won. But yes, we should do that. We should absolutely be involved that way.
Yeah, and of course, I actually love voting. I pray about it. It's an expression of the privilege that we have to speak into our nation. I'm also the guy who votes like in every 4 years presidential election, more people vote. But let me just say that a whole lot of you listening right now are not voting. I want to encourage you to make that a priority to register and to vote. But let's go to Tim in South Carolina. Tim, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just one question I want to ask about bringing love of country into Christian worship in the church. I've seen both sides of this. That some people would say even having an American flag in the church is idolatry. Reciting the Pledge of Allegiance or singing the national anthem in church worship is idolatrous. Some would say it's a Christian love for the country and a desire for God to be working in that society. How do you interpret this?
I think it's a super question, Tim. Hold on just a second. I'm out of books to give away, but I would have given you one because that's a great question or a comment. Dan, I mean, patriotism, public worship, by the way, the national anthem, the challenge with the national anthem, by the way, it's one of the hardest national anthems to sing. So that's a tough one to sing. And my daughter sung the national anthem at the White Sox game, and she killed it. But those high notes. But anyway, what do you think, Dan?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think every church has a different context, and I think there's an appropriate way to honor the country at these moments. But we want to remember that worship of Christ is preeminent. I used to be troubled by a flag, the presence of a flag in a church. I'm no longer troubled by that because I think it gives us a sense of the place where God has put us. But as long as the cross and the Christian symbols and Christian worship is preeminent and first place, that's going to look different for different places. I think one of the key things here is Christian unity. I would not want a church to be divided because we sang this song or we didn't sing this song, or we did this or we didn't do that. So I think you have to really be unified on this. There's an appropriate way to honor the country in a service as a measure of gratitude, and honor the sacrifice and honor the good things God has given us, while also making Christ the main thing on Sunday mornings.
Yeah, how did you? I mean, like you said, you used to be bothered by it, and now you're about the flag, which again, I actually don't really. I go to a large church, so I'm not quite sure if we have a flag on the stage. But what bothered you before? Why were you concerned about it at some point?
I think before I was a little persuaded by arguments that it has no place there, that, why is it there? We're worshiping Christ. I think I flipped on that and have said, I've been around the world as you have, Ed, and in different contexts where you clearly understood you were in a country and there were those symbols there, and yet the cross was still preeminent. So I came back thinking, it's okay. Now, if there's a huge flag that covers the whole stage and you can't see the cross, and everyone's wearing like America 250 shirts on stage, I mean, that's a little much, right? But I think in a subtle way, it reminds us of our mission field. It reminds us that we're not just disembodied people, but we're actually put by God in a specific place and time.
Yeah, I was in Ukraine recently. I snuck in last year, big bombardment night, the whole 9 yards. And I went to church on Sunday. One of my Talbot has a whole extension center in Kyiv, and I went to church, and there was the cross, but behind the cross was the Ukrainian flag, which consider an American flag in the big stage up front, and then a cross in front of it probably would make you and me uncomfortable. But it is interesting how different countries sort of see that differently. My desire is coming back to where we started, is that rightly ordering of loves. And for me, I want my worship service to be primarily driven by that as well. So part of the challenge, of course, is finding the right direction to sort of do that. How much to do that? Let's go to. I hope I'm saying your name right. Is it Elaine or Lane in Michigan? Jump right in.
Hello, yes, it's Elaine, and thank you for discussing this. Our church just recently showed Juneteenth, done by Our Daily Bread, which celebrates freedom from slavery, that knowledge. And I have a biracial family, and I want to celebrate freedom in Christ, freedom from slavery, and freedom in the United States. So on the video, they suggest celebrate freedom from June 19th to July 4th. And
Lane, I got to say, we've got about a minute left, so I need you to wrap this up so we can have Dan comment.
Right. So I want you to comment on the celebration of Juneteenth as a Christian church. I learned about it from church, and I know it's an amazing history of celebrating church. Thank you.
It is that Galveston moment. All right, Dan, you got 1 minute left. Great comment, Elaine.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And Juneteenth is a great holiday when, slaves were told that they had freedom. And it's something we should absolutely celebrate. And on a couple of levels. One, as you mentioned, has given us freedom, but also freedom from an oppressive and sinful system that enslaved people based on the color of their skin. It also reminds us that the United States has come a long way in some of these issues and still has ways to go. That part of the reason we were able to eradicate slavery is because people called us up to the ideals that we said we believed. All men are created equal. And that's an ongoing project that Christians should happily participate in as we celebrate our country.
Love that. Dan Darling, the book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism. Hey, thanks for everyone for listening. Thanks to our team at Moody Radio, my producer, Karen Hendren, engineer Merle St. James, associate producer Lisa Jemty, and Simon on the phones. Again, you're listening to Ed Stetzer Live as a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Bible Institute.